Next, I'd like to welcome to the stage Andrew Ng. Please come on up, Andrew. Andrew, I think just to get started, you have a few slides to help frame some of your thoughts about open models, open source, and the role of competition in AI. So I would love it if you could just kick us off with a few comments.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. It's good to hear Percy. Good to see everyone. So I've just 3 slides, and I'll be quick. I think one of the hard things to understand about AI is that it's a general purpose technology, meaning it's not useful just for a single thing, but it's useful for a very large multitude of tasks. I think there are some business representatives in the audience. I think for businesses, this is exciting because it gives us the opportunity to identify and build tons of applications in healthcare, financial services, education, logistics, and on and on and on. And in terms of the regulatory landscape, I think my key messages are, 1, I think it's important to distinguish between technology and applications. And second, to promote competition and innovation, I feel like we should lean into regulating applications rather than technologies, and also really promote open source. So this is what I think of as the AI stack. Different people have slightly different versions of this, but I think the lowest level is a semiconductor level. On top of that are the clouds. Both of these are relatively capital intensive, thus maybe slightly concentrated. And then the new layer has been the AI technology tooling layer. The companies provide foundation models and large language models and so on. And what I've seen with most waves of innovation is the media, traditional media and social media, tends to focus on technology layer. This is fun to talk about. It's fun to talk about what's OpenAI doing, and so on. But I think that there's an even bigger set of opportunities than this, which is the application layer. Because for the technology tooling layer and the layers below to be successful, almost by definition, we need the applications on top of them to generate even more revenue so they can afford to pay the technology layers underneath. And I think in order to prevent choke points, I think there's a lot of concern about choke points at the AI technology layer, where only a small number of companies have access to foundation models. I think open source is one of our best tools for promoting innovation and preventing a new choke point from arising at the AI technology layer. And candidly, I would love if governments all around the world can promote competition. Candidly, I'd be quite happy if governments all around the world just don't stifle competition, but having governments promote competition as opposed to merely avoid stifling it seems like a dream at this point in time. But let me dig into that a little bit more. And this is what I mean by technology versus applications. And this is an important concept. For all of you in government, I hope you remember this part. So I'm going to talk about technology layer as well as an application layer. So an example of a technology might be an electric motor. And an electric motor, which can be used in lots of applications, could be put into a blender, electric vehicle, a dialysis machine, or also a guided bomb. And so I think of technology as tools that can be applied in many different ways to solve many different problems, like an electric motor. And then applications are specific implementations designed to meet a particular customer need. And this could be a very beneficial need, like a dialysis machine, or one that we don't want adversaries to have access to, like a guided bomb. And I feel like if you ask me to make electric motors safe, I don't know how to do that, right? The only way to make an electric motor safe is to make it so tiny that it's basically useless to everyone. And indeed, blenders can be dangerous. This is why we regulate blenders. We don't want blenders to be dangerous in people's homes and damage and hurt children's limbs and so on. Electric vehicles, let's make sure electric vehicles are safe. And dialysis machines, boy, that's a medical device. Let's make sure to regulate that. And guided bombs, yes, we absolutely need to regulate production of weapons and munitions. But if you try to say an electric motor could be used by build a bomb, so let's make the electric motor manufacturer guarantee their electric motor will never be used by anyone to make a guided bomb, then the only way is for the electric motor manufacturer to shut down the business, and that means you lose the blender and the EV and the dialysis machine as well. And this is what we're seeing in AI. AI models, large language models, foundation models are general purpose technologies we can use to build a medical device, to give medical advice, or to rank someone's social media feed for good purposes or bad purposes. It can be used to build a chatbot. It can be used to generate political deepfakes. There are tons of beneficial as well as a small number of harmful applications. And I think risks are a function of the application, not the technology. And when you if someone tries to regulate the general purpose technology, like electric motors, that tends to just stifle innovation because you're cutting off the innovation at the root and shutting down a huge range of beneficial applications, as well as maybe a small number of harmful ones. So I feel like what we do need is, I do want medical devices to be safe. I do want electrical vehicles to be safe. And what I'm seeing, unfortunately, is many governments are saying, boy, it's too hard to look at the applications and regulate them. So let's do the easy thing, which is, let's just regulate the AI technology. But that's a bad move. I think we need to do the harder but the right thing, which is look at the actual applications, which is where the risks are, and pass appropriate regulations to protect citizens. And I've been really surprised at the intensity of the lobbying to shut down open source. I think maybe predictably, there are some companies that have invested billions of dollars into training large foundation models. And when you've invested billions of dollars, it's really inconvenient when some other company releases an open source or open weights model that severely degrades the value of that massive investment you made to train a proprietary model. And I get it. It's really annoying when someone open sources something. But what has happened over the last year was really intense lobbying under the guise of AI safety. And you hear very smart people say things like, of course I support open source, but don't you want open source to be safe? And that's used as an excuse to put in place very burdensome licensing requirements that will stifle anyone's ability. They'll severely stifle many teams' ability to release free, open weights or open source software on the internet. And candidly, I think that open source today, open weights or open source, is a key part of the AI supply chain. I feel like one of the latest lines of attacks on open source has been to prevent our near-peer adversaries from getting access to it. But candidly, I actually, on that grounds, actually worry. I think someday, right, some kid in some developing economy will go and ask a foundation model, ask a large language model, is democracy important? What's the role of free press? Is independent judiciary important? And when kids like that ask questions, I would quite like the large language model to reflect the values of liberal democracies. I'm biased, I like democracy. And I think that if democracies inflict this self-inflicted wound of shutting down our open source, then other countries will step into this to the detriment of democracy. So I hope that one of the best ways to promote innovation and competition will be to protect open source. I hope all of us will do that. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Well, that was great. Thank you so much. And you've really laid out a landscape of a lot of the things that people are worried about and talking about. So when you think about, maybe I'll just pick up where you left off. You mentioned that you thought other countries might do something. I think that relates a little bit to the Economist language of incremental risk and incremental benefit that we were just talking about with Percy. Can you talk through a little bit, counterfactual worlds, I guess, what happens without some of these open weight models? And can you just flesh out a little bit more what you might see happening by bad actors or other countries, or and what might happen in our ecosystem?
Yeah, so let's see. I think that choke points will arise. I see two possibilities, both bad, I think. One would be if everyone is beholden to a very, very small number of foundation model providers, thus creating a new choke point. If we don't have access to open source, I think academia will suffer. A lot of the work that Percy talked about, and that frankly many universities all around the world are doing. I was actually just in Korea a couple of weeks ago at a government meeting. Prime Minister of Korea was there, and I think that also, I was hearing about Korean academics saying, please protect open source because academics really need this to monitor, to do their work. So I think academia would have a much harder time. And then a lot of innovation just won't happen because I see so many startups all around the world, not just in Silicon Valley, all around the world, building on top of the open models and doing things that are simply not possible on top of the closed models. Maybe one example, Llama 3 was released as open weights. And so, Llama 3, it turns out, has a relatively short input context length. It can only accept a relatively short input. And so some team, extended that to accept a much longer input, expanded context length. And if Llama 3 had been released as an API-only thing, this work would have been impossible. And so open source builds on top of itself as a very rich ecosystem that I think some companies, through really intense lobbying efforts, are really eager to try to shut off. And by the way, I say, so some of the large companies have been saying stuff like, oh, we totally support open source, just not of the most advanced models. We've got to keep that away from our adversaries. It's been, over the last year, it's been fascinating. I've not spent a lot of time in DC. I tend to stay here and just write software. It's been fascinating to see how the adversaries of open source have shifted their arguments multiple times. It was initially, AI could kill us all. AI is like nuclear weapons, the analogy that makes no sense. AI is intelligent, nuclear weapons blows up cities. It's a strange analogy. When that argument lost credibility, it was then, oh, AI could create bioweapons. But then OpenAI and RAND published reports showing that the incremental risk is very small. So yes, of course AI could be used to create bioweapons, I'll just say that. So can an Excel spreadsheet. Excel spreadsheets, you can track your experiments. Excel is really dangerous, let's regulate that. So, but so the evidence that AI holds more, that there is no evidence, and as far as I'm aware, that AI holds more than, an Excel spreadsheet or web search for creating bioweapons, and people have studied this. So when that lost credibility, then it became, our adversaries, China specifically, gotta keep, maybe Russia, I don't know, right? So it's been fascinating watching the shifting arguments of the open source. And I've also been fascinated, it's been amazing to watch how effective some of these companies have been at convincing governments to regulate very clearly against their own national interests. This is mainly outside the United States. But.
Thank you so much. And so we're so fortunate to have you here from so many different perspectives you have, because of course you did foundational research as a computer science professor at Stanford. You co-founded Coursera, so anybody wants to learn about this, you can watch his videos. And you're now also an investor and an entrepreneur. Can I turn this around a little bit to think about from the investor perspective? If you are investing in applications, how do you think about possible choke points and risks that your investments might experience?
Yeah, I think the choke point that we'd all love to avoid, a lot of it is at the foundation model layer. And I think it'll be hard for companies to establish a choke point there if we promote and invest in open source. So there's a government that is having conversations with that, where the administration was considering for their own procurement process to really have a bias for selecting open source based solutions. I don't know if they'll do it, but one government, not the US, that was talking to was considering this. I think that type of move to promote open source would be very good. There's one other layer that maybe I'll comment on that's kind of emerging, which is on top of the foundation model layer. There's also another layer that's emerging called an orchestration layer. And what that means is often when you're building systems, you don't just call an LLM large language model once, you call it a bunch of times, and you call it once, its output goes into the second prompt, goes into the third prompt, you pull some data to implement RAG and so on. So that orchestration layer right now is very dynamic, very competitive. So there is no choke point there at this moment, but I definitely see more startups at this point probably trying to become a dominant player. But that's very good, right? You want entrepreneurs with low resources aspiring to build the next Google or the next Meta or something. So I think it's very intense competition, but I could see a future many years from now if there's a new player that wins.
So I'd love to hear you elaborate a little bit about that, because I know that you've talked about AI agents as the next big wave in applications, and I think that kind of picks up on this orchestration layer. And I think, most people in the audience have seen the images, they've seen the text, they've played with the text, but it's a little bit harder for the ordinary person to intuit what's going on behind the scenes, and also, frankly, what's possible when you have multiple agents kind of interacting together. So I'm wondering if you could talk us through what makes you excited about that, or maybe a use case or an example if you have one.
Sure, yeah. So I think one of the most exciting trends in tech right now is AI agents or agentic AI, workflows. And Lucy, here's what I mean. Many of us are used to going to a large language model and prompting it to have it write a response, right? And that's kind of like, imagine you go to someone and say, I'd like you to write a topic, I'd like you to write an essay on a certain topic, but I need you to type from start to finish without ever hitting backspace or without ever going back to edit your work. Or if you ask the AI to write code, it's like going to a developer and saying, I need you to just type out a computer program and just type it out from start to finish, and then I want it to work. And it turns out that, despite the difficulty of this, right, like I can't write like that, I can't code like that. AI actually does surprisingly well at this task. But it turns out that if you use an agentic AI workflow in which you can ask the AI, write an outline, and then think about your outline. Do you need to do any web research? If so, what do you want to type into the search bar of a web search engine? Then go do a bunch of Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo searches or whatever. And then get the results and then write a first draft. And then read your own draft and think about where you want to improve it and iterate over your own work over and over. So that's called an agentic workflow. And it turns out that this does way better than if you force an AI system to write from start to finish. One of the exciting things I found is that my team collected data, the kind of third-party data. We did a survey of AI, large language models and agents applied to writing code. There's a standard benchmark from OpenAI called Human Eval that measures how well AI systems write code. And it turns out that ChatGPT or GPT 3.5 had 48% right on this benchmark. GPT-4 had, I think I want to say 67%, 67 or 68%. So GPT-4 was a huge improvement from 48 to 67, 68%. But it turns out the improvement from 3.5, GPT 3.5 to GPT 4 is dwarfed by the improvement from if you wrap an agentic workflow around this. And even using GPT 3.5 on this benchmark, you can get kind of up to 95% accuracy by having the AI system write code and then run some tests, fix its own code, and just iterate over and over to keep on improving its code until it works. So I think for those of you interested about applications, I think agentic AI is going to be a very large trend that I think we're actually seeing this in the field already. My Team AI Fund, we build startups. We build one startup per month. But for many applications, in legal work and healthcare and tons of other applications, we're seeing these agentic workflows deliver really fantastic results that we couldn't with other ways.
And so what else could it do besides like search the web, which again, I think we have some intuition for that, but if you were building a custom one of those, what are other kinds of calls that this type of agentic AI could make?
Yeah, so maybe some techniques I find exciting in agentic workflows. One is reflection, where we ask it to read over your own output and just see if you have any ways to improve it. That surprisingly helps quite a bit. Tool use, where it can search the web or it can search different information sources or access your calendar with permission if that's what you needed to do. Or sometimes it can also make an API call to take an action. So people are building agents, customer service agents, for example, they can make an API call to retrieve information or even make an API call to maybe issue a refund. And then I think and then agents can increasingly plan out complex sequence of steps where we can say, to do this task, I need to first do research, then write an outline, then fact check, and then write the final draft or whatever. And it can decide for itself what sequence of actions to take. And then lastly, multi-agent collaborations has been a fascinating trend where it turns out that if you have two AI systems and you say, you're the writer, you're the researcher, you're the fact checker, and then build 3 agents, and each agent is really built by prompting an LM. You tell the LM, dear LM, your role is you are now a fact checker, so go fact check these, please. Or dear LM, you're now a writer, so go write a clear article. Then if you have multi-agents interact, that also really tends to drive improved results. So, and it's a very nascent, very exciting space, right? Frankly, 6 years ago, this stuff it kind of wasn't working. A year ago, it was demoware. It was great demos, really couldn't get it to work at all. But now, I feel like I'm seeing month-over-month improvements on agentic AI workflows. So this is actually a very exciting space, and I think it does feel hyper-competitive right now at the agentic layer, and also the innovation, all the applications. How do you take this and apply this to many different domains? That's a very that layer of innovation feels like it's exploding as well. It's a very exciting time to be in.
So one of the things that was interesting about the first large language models is that they were mostly using open data that they scraped. And later this afternoon, we're going to come back and talk more about the scraping issue. But they were using kind of common data and not as much like proprietary data, not as much like user click data or things like that. But in some of these applications you're talking about, and also I guess previously the foundation models would kind of interact with lots of different things, but they weren't like directly connecting to other software products. So the agentic products you're talking about, you mentioned they might read your email. Later this afternoon, we're going to talk about using like CRMs, talking to CRMs. So some of these layers might now need to interoperate with other software products, and they might also possibly make more use of user feedback data depending on what they're interoperating with. So I'm sort of curious if you could do a little bit of like forward looking where you think things are going. What are some of the inputs and bottlenecks that might come up in the future implementations of these as they start interoperating with more systems?
It's really interesting. I really appreciate, I think Susan has always been a very long-term forward thinker. I have to say, I find myself inspired by that view. And honestly, I'll get to your question. Honestly, what I'm really worried about is less the long-term future, is the awful regulations I'm seeing right now. Just as an example, California, SB 1047, I think it'd be awful for American innovation and for California innovation. I can't believe that California, home of such an innovative place with so many inventions, is contemplating such a ridiculous regulation. It is equivalent of saying if your electric motor is used by anyone for any nefarious purpose, you could be liable. It's just awful, and I don't see how the state of California could seriously contemplate something like that. Sorry, but to take a longer looking view, I feel like I think that one interesting dynamic would be where will incumbents win and where will new entrants have a shot. So I think in the case of electronic health records, I think we know that Epic as an electronic health record system, right, has massive market power, immense concentration. So where will incumbents like that be able to lock down options to block innovators? I think those are issues worth thinking about. I don't know. I think maybe part of me feels like for a lot of applications, it feels like a relatively dynamic landscape still. But I think access to data is going to be a thing. And I think I worry a little bit about some of the emerging proprietary deals to access data. One of the debates is what should fair use be in the era of AI? Is it okay for a company to read something on the open internet and use it to train the AI model? My personal preference, I believe the answer should be yes, but that's my kind of personal opinion. And I realized that, so I posted on social media. So New York Times sued OpenAI and Microsoft, I think, and I found myself more on OpenAI side than on the New York Times side in that matter, because and I think I learned an interesting lesson when I posted on social media. So I kind of said, I as a human am allowed to read articles on the open internet and learn from it. I would like AI to be able to do so too, and I actually got a bit of hate/criticism, including from some Stanford faculty, saying that I had no reason for making an equivalence between humans and AI, right? Because the point was that, yes, humans can read stuff on the internet, but just because a human can do it, why is it a reason to let AI do it? And I realized that I think there are two views to AI. I tend to view AI as an extension of myself. I think of it as a tool. Like, I use a web browser to do this, and someone may use accessibility software to make the font bigger, or to just display a web page in high contrast. So to me, that's a tool. I'm going to use AI to do for me something that I could do. And so if I could do something, why can't I use a tool to do it too? I can read web pages. I want to use a tool to do it more efficiently. And I realized there are others, I'm less of that view, that view AI as almost a different species. This is thing separate from themselves. And I don't think animals need to necessarily have the same rights as humans. I think I value human life. And sometimes if bug is annoying me, I will not treat it very nicely. So I don't think all bugs need to have the same. I don't think other species, need to have exact same rights as humans. And I think realize there's some people that view AI as almost a separate species, and so we don't need to give them the same right to read the internet as humans do. So I tend to view AI as a tool, and that's why I took a certain view. But it's interesting seeing, these two different.
Well, so this is a very interesting conversation, and I just want to advertise that we will have a panel at the later this afternoon, and we will hear from the authors and publishers who probably have a different view from you, and that will be fleshed out. But this conversation is one that is clearly extremely important to be had, and the perspective of that is an input to this open source, which is providing all of this innovation. Seems like that's a perspective to be weighed.
Yeah, and just to say, I do acknowledge this is a difficult issue. I honestly don't know my gut was let's let AI read the open internet, but I do think it's a difficult issue. I don't claim to know the right answer, and I think protecting the free press, which is a key pillar of democracy, I think they're very difficult issues. I don't think I know the full answer to. So.
Very good. Well, one of the few things you may not know the full answer to. We always wonder about the AI in your brain. Well, just in the last couple of minutes, our next panel after the break is going to be about healthcare and AI. And I know you also have a long history with health applications. You mentioned access to electronic medical record data, which could be a bottleneck here. But I'm curious, generally, what are other ways, potentially completely different ways, that you might see AI impacting the healthcare industry, and sort of what are the other inputs that are needed for this health innovation?
It's been my group here at Stanford has done a lot of work on healthcare. We've deployed stuff at Stanford Hospital, kind of publishing a bunch of papers and so on. It's been fascinating watching how difficult it is to approach healthcare in the US. I feel like, and in my team at AI Fund, we see opportunities left and right? There are so many ways we can drive efficiencies, improve patient care, make doctors' lives better. And the problem we keep on running into over and over is not that we don't know how to use AI to make things better, is the go-to-market. I think that with the US patient payer provider, misaligned incentives, lots of choke points. How do you get a payer to how do you get there to be a code so the payer can reimburse and all that? So those tend to be the problems, not even the technical problems or how to build things that can actually make lives better. And then the other dynamic I'm seeing because of this gnarly ball of stuff that's so hard to approach in the US, I'm seeing a lot of innovation and startups, for-profit, non-profit, academic, happening overseas rather than in the United States. Was visiting Singapore a few months ago, I was seeing stuff deployed in hospitals in Singapore that I've not seen deployed anywhere in the United States. So, check in the hospital in Singapore if you have pneumonia, or read your EHR and try to give the doctor guidance on, does it see something that maybe the doctor has missed? I see stuff deployed in Singapore, which has a unified patient ID, basically, that we don't have in the US, low litigation risks, all sorts of things. And then recently, AI Fund recently working with a startup that decided to pursue an India go-to-market, because candidly, it's going to be much easier to take certain things to market in India than here in the United States. And just as a US citizen, I just felt kind of sad that we can't seem to get the job done here in America.
Well, so thank you so much, Andrew. Your many different perspectives in here were so interesting, and I also love that you're not afraid to say what you think, so that it makes for a much more powerful and interesting conversation.
Can I add one comment that might get me into trouble?
Okay, all right.
So I know there are a lot of government officials here, so this is something I shouldn't say, but honestly, I'm pro-world, pro-tech, and I'm also pro-America. One thing that saddened me was it felt like parts of our government have become anti-tech in a way that I've not seen before. So in multiple previous administrations, not one, multiple previous administrations, if European regulators were messing around with American companies, our government went in to argue with the Europeans, right? And I appreciated that. Now I kind of see when foreign regulators are messing with American companies, feels like sometimes our administration doesn't lift a finger to help them. I'm sure I'm seeing only isolated cases. I'm sure this is a broader, context context I'm not seeing. But I feel like I'm pro-tech, I'm pro-competition, I'm pro-startup, I'm also pro-American big tech, and I wish that Silicon Valley and American tech in general is very precious. And then candidly, when I see our politicians call up individual entrepreneurs, like Bernie Sanders call out Elon Musk by name for the sin of being successful and wealthy, and yes, he's committed other sins, but it feels like I wish I felt like America remained, firmly pro-competition and pro-tech, including big tech and small tech and startup. But let's just keep building this together. Yeah.
Well, so Andrew,
Right.
thank you so much for being here. We're going to move to a coffee break, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes for the next session. Thank you.